All right, everyone. I think we can probably go ahead and get started. So thanks for joining us today. We're going over using drones for fire mitigation, and we are joined by Alan Bishop, who has experience with boulder rescue in UAS Colorado. And then my name is Ryan Carter. I'm going to be the enterprise account manager for the West Coast for public safety and inspection. And then we also have Shaquille James, who takes on the East Coast for public safety and inspection. So without further ado, I want to give Alan a chance to introduce himself, give us a little bio. But also I want to point out, if you guys have any questions or want to use the chat box here, we will be taking on questions here at the end. So feel free to use that throughout the presentation. But Alan?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Ryan, for the invite to present a pretty important topic for today's session. My name's Alan Bishop, live in Lafayette, Colorado, in Boulder County. I wear a number of hats, so I'll try to get through my resume here very quickly. First of all, I'm a founding board member of UAS Colorado since the very beginning. I'm also a reserve with the Boulder County Sheriff's Office mission support specialist, focusing on search and rescue and SWAT operations. I'm also a member of Boulder Emergency Squad as a drone pilot for them. I've been a Part 61 pilot for 45 plus years. I was one of the early first adopters of Part 107 sign up. And I'm also chair of the Boulder County Amateur Radio Emergency Services Organization. So I wear a lot of hats, and they're all relative to emergency preparedness, emergency response. And the advent of drones has added a significant tool to the toolbox of first responders, law enforcement, et cetera. So today I intend to present to you basically a study that I did based on the fires that have permeated here, and especially in Boulder County, but throughout Colorado. Marshall Fire being probably the most significant. In fact, it is, with over 1,000 homes lost. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and let Ryan switch command and control here and let me know. Brian?
Yeah,
Ryan?
perfect. I just want to give a quick overview of what we do here at Multi-Copter Warehouse as well. We were founded in 2014 and are a Tier 1 enterprise dealer for DJI and Autel. We also carry the FLIR payloads for the compatible DJI drones. But then we do have a public safety inspection division as well as a survey mapping division. And then we are also an authorized service center. So if you guys have any repairs that are needed, come see us. And then I also wanted to point out for our audience today, we did start a new social media project, Drones for Public Safety. So you can find us at Drones for Safety on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And we use this platform to inform and educate the community on how public safety drone programs are utilizing the technology to keep communities safer and really just make their jobs easier at the end of the day. So we'd love for you to check that out. And then if you did also want to stay tuned, at the end we will be announcing some of our future webinars, as well as here's our contact information for both myself and Shaquille. But without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and pass over control here to Alan so we can take a look at this study here.
Okay, let me pull up the proper screen. So do we have the screen showing?
That looks to be good. Yep.
All right. Well, as I mentioned, drones in fire, it goes beyond that. It's fire, it's floods, it's hazmat, any kind of pestilence that comes about in an emergency world. So in this particular presentation, I cover both fire, floods in particular, and their applicability in emergency management. So without further ado, So those of you that have lived in Colorado for at least the past 10 years, this is the scorecard of fires from the most horrific at the top down to the least. It's Marshall Fire, over 1,000 homes, Black Forest, East Troublesome, Waldo Canyon, High Park, and 4 Mile. And I've been a participant in all of these at some level through the Boulder Mercy Squad or through the Sheriff's Office and the utilization of drones of late. We're going to be focusing today on the Marshall Fire, which was a significant fire in the Boulder County area. So here's what I thought was interesting. Because of my involvement with Marshall Fire, I participated in the after action report, the AAR, which most of you are probably familiar with. It's a after action report that's done post event to see what went right and what went wrong. And what was interesting, the Marshall Fire is the after action report consists of 56 pages, 14,378 words. And the missing word in that entire document, drone, or derivative UAS or UAV. So I thought that was quite interesting, which was the motivation to do this particular presentation. Those of you familiar with ICS or NIMS, there are 4 phases in emergency management. And wherever you see the drone icon come next to a bullet point, that means that this is an application well suited for the use of drones. So in this case here, obviously mitigation, which we're going to get into, preparedness, response, recovery, and I've added a 5th one. And I believe in this quite strongly, that there's a post-event planning opportunity for the use of drones, which we're going to clearly get into here in the next several slides. So mitigation, preventing or minimizing emergencies. We don't use drones for building codes, things of that nature. Zoning rules, there may be some derivative benefit there in post events, but directly drones are not used there. Rebuilding damaged structures, etc. Maybe on inspections, there might be an opportunity. But more importantly, flood mapping, identify low-lying areas to help mitigate the problems that come with having to deal with huge amounts of water moving through relatively small channels. And then lastly, of course, identification of fire sources and risks, which we're going to really focus on today. So continuing with mitigation, flood mapping, just to give you an example, this is the St. Vrain River. In 2013, there was a significant 500-year flood that came through Colorado, and in particular focused on Boulder County. This is the St. Vrain as it goes through the city of Longmont. This was the before photo. Nice walking paths, a very heavily forested area where the St. Vrain comes down. Typically, it's a relatively small amount of water that passes through except for runoff time. Then we show the aftermath. All of the trees were washed away, significant damage on both sides of the river. This is the results of many months of basically reconstructing the path of the water, putting in slow down channels in ponds and lakes to help mitigate an onrush of water. Drones play an important role in this in planning and architectural use. Here's the part that's dear to my heart because I live in an area in Lafayette that is prone and has some serious issues right now. This is a ditch just about 500 feet from my home. I live at Indian Peaks Golf Course in Lafayette. As you can see, this has not been burned. There's been no mitigation through the COVID years in the past 2.5. That's mitigation. This is what needs to be done when ditches and common areas within housing developments are not taken care of before they become what I call fuses. And you're going to see that here coming up. The other thing we find in Colorado is people are reluctant and they love to have houses in the trees and the foothills and the mountains, and even more so love to have trees against their decks, cooling the house and so on. The problem with that is once a fire starts, you end up with this. In fire mitigation is not just for the flatlands, but it's also for the mountains. Drones can play a significant role in this. by taking aerial photographs at 2 points during the year. Springtime coming out of winter, where everything is dead. And in Colorado, you can go from double-digit humidity to single-digit in the course of a few days. And then the winds, of course, can be horrific here in Colorado. And you put that all together, you have the makings of a opportunity for a marshal fire over and over again. So mitigation is key, and drones in that effort are also key in the toolbox. So here's a broader view, which I took with my drone. The arrow's pointing to the ditch that I just showed you. There's an additional ditch that goes all the way through. And as you can see, this ditch is within 50 to 100 feet of homes. The arrows indicate the location, but also indicates the typical direction of wind from west to east. So in the unlikely event, but possible event that a ditch catches fire somewhere downstream, the winds, and Marshall, by the way, was 60 to 70 mile an hour sustained winds gusting to over 100. It was a literal inferno. So mitigation, again, is very important. And using drones to map this and to show this to the city management and the fire departments is instrumental in getting these things mitigated before they become a fuse to a greater catastrophe. The other thing that I get called on repeatedly, and I've been here 3 times now in Golden, one of the things that Boulder County and a number of counties in Colorado, especially in the foothills, they use lightning detection software. Lightning is frequent during the summertime, and this software provides a GPS coordinate of where the lightning strikes are. So we got a call, DES did, from Golden. They had the night before 5 lightning strikes over on Granite Peak, just west of Golden. And we were called in, and I flew this particular mission. And get over here to start this. This is using a DJI Mavic, Mavic 2 Advanced. Actually, this was with the Zoom. Nighttime, we use the thermal image. So this is the Zoom Mavic. And we quickly found the smoke and also found the fire. You'll see here down below. There's the fire. I'll just pause this for a second. We have over here on the right, we brought a ground team in, a hand team. And the wonderful opportunity that drones provide is we identified the fire. We contacted the ground crews and we positioned our drone over them and basically told them, follow the drone and we'll give you a safe route in and quick route so you can start putting the fire out. And so that was done very effectively. And basically within 20 minutes of detecting the fire, we had a ground crew on scene starting to mitigate the fire and put it out. And we've been there 3 times now, 3 different thunderstorms throughout the past 2 years. And they like us. We're waiting for the day they buy their own drone, so they won't have to rely on us. Okay, this is where we get into some really technical and also some profound evidence that I put together to illustrate the Marshall Fire and what really exacerbated the situation. So this is, my cursor is showing you Marshall, the town of Marshall, which was the ignition point, they believe, of the fire. There were 3 options that they believe caused it, either sparks or ashes coming out of an underground coal mine that's been on fire for about 150 years. They suspect possibly the wind went into some of the vents, really got the fire going, and the ashes that came out another vent may have started it. But there were 2 other possible sources: electrical power lines shorting out, or a burn that was being done by an organization to remain unnamed since it's not official. So this was the area that the Marshall Fire contained. I'm going to show you the next element of this. So I went out there and I flew the area post-event and found the yellow lines are the ditches. These ditches had not been burned. There was no mitigation. They were filled with brush, large grass, buffalo grass. And what's interesting is these ditches run west to east, which happened to be the exact direction of the winds that I mentioned earlier were 60, 70 mile an hour sustained, gusting to over 100. Now I'm going to overlay the official fire boundaries. This is the post-event location of where the boundaries of the fire went. I don't necessarily believe in coincidences. It's interesting to me that the heart of the fire area had these, what I call fuses, these channels of unburned, highly flammable brush, grass, etc. These run right along the main burn area and into the secondary burn area. So pretty profound information. The wind direction was, as the arrow indicates, 75 mile an hour sustained, gusting to over 100. So how do we prepare for this? Well, we certainly train for fires. Drones can be used in the training, at least in documenting and perhaps providing an educational source in a training event. Planning certainly could be used. Procuring resources, not so much, but we'll get into delivery here in a little bit. Intelligence surveillance activities, also known as ISR, intelligence surveillance reconnaissance, from my military background. And that certainly is the use of drones. And then exercising to assure adequacy of planning efforts, again, using the drone to document any actually not tabletop, but actual exercises in addressing these various emergencies that plague our state. Then there's response, responding to emergencies, evacuating victims. We can certainly provide safe routes in, safe routes out. Deployment of response teams, medical stockpiles, other assets, not so much a drone function, but can be used. Establishment of incident command and operations, not so much. Now recovering, search and rescue, recovery. Absolutely a drone function. Reconstruction of government operations and services, again, not so much. Then we have search and rescue. This is a mission that I did with Boulder County Search and Rescue. This is at 2 a.m. at night, no moon, pitch black. We have an Alzheimer patient who wandered away from his home, and the family called and wanted us to go find him. This is using a Mavic Advanced with a dual camera, color 4K, plus the 640 by 512 high-res thermal camera. And again, this is pitch black like the margins are, 2 in the morning. So I'm flying over, this is near Wanaka Lake here in Lafayette. And there's a lot more mission here, but in the interest of time, I narrowed it down to where I found the individual. Again, walking 2 o'clock in the morning. Looks to be okay, but again, we did a identification of him. And so I waited for him to turn, see which way he went, contacted Incident Command, which was Lafayette PD and the Sheriff's Office. And they sent a car to meet him at the end of this trail, picked him up. They made sure he was okay, took him to the hospital for a checkout and returned him home. Just another tool in the toolbox using drones, and especially the Mavic 2 Enterprise Advanced. An amazing device in itself. Recovering from emergencies, damage assessment, absolutely a function for drones. This was used extensively in the Marshall Fire. Mapping, after action reporting. While the drone doesn't provide direct, it can provide information that's very useful in the after action report. And of course, the AARs can contain documentation, analysis of the event, both pre and post event and during. a critique, and any adjustments to training and response. So let's talk about damage assessment. So this is in Louisville. This is a very large development. So I've taken the time to illustrate the ditches and the common areas, the open areas that developers typically place between homes in a large development. It looks nice, it's great, it's open, typically grassy. And when you don't mitigate those areas, you are setting yourself up for these fuses to have a profound effect. And now you're going to see what happened. Again, these ditches were not mitigated, and mostly due to COVID, where they just didn't get out to do it for a variety of reasons. So take a close look. This is the before, and this is the result of the Marshall Fire. And again, I don't believe in coincidences. The fact that these ditches were on the periphery, and again, the winds were coming from the left, from the west, straight across the screen to the right, to the east. This was the largest area of dwelling loss. Down below, we lost more. Further into Superior, they lost an equal amount. Again, over 1,000 homes were lost. The fire break was this road, and the fire department, which was right here, this is the Louisville main firehouse, they were able to stand up a line. They had to back off from here. They thought they could contain it at this point, but the winds were just too horrific. And these houses just went from one to the other. The temperatures reached approximately 2,000 degrees. All these modern homes have steel I-beams that bridge across the foundation to hold up the house. These melted, not into a liquid, but they bent. Any vehicles that were in the driveways or in garages that had aluminum wheels, every single one that burned was a pool of molten aluminum below each of the axles. That's the temperatures. And once that happens and you have wind blowing at 100 miles an hour, you cannot fight it, you cannot stop it. So what you do is you wait for the wind to die down. And then this was the point where the wind started to change direction and started to lower its velocity, which is how this was stopped. Pretty remarkable. Luckily a minimal loss of life, but even that was terrible. 2 people, now 3 people. So let's look at mapping. This is an integral part of drone use. Powerful tools. Secondary companies have come out of the woodwork with great software that's in the cloud. You can take your drone, and which we'll show here in a little bit, do a grid pass over an entire community. I can map all of Lafayette in 2 days with 2 people, myself and a support person, and then present that to the city management and get them to address these mitigation requirements. So again, mapping. This is the Marshall Fire. This is Marshall right here. This is where it spread to this area, including Superior. That's the fire area. Again, that was stitched together after the fire. We did damage assessment. So survey and damage assessment, absolutely a function of drone technology. Course of mapping, search and rescue and recovery, delivery, which I'm going to show you here in a bit, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, and operational safety. Now, another thing that I get to do in my roles is respond to fires, of course, not just wildland fires, but industrial fires. In this case, Lyons had a fire about a month and a half ago. This took out the entire north side of Main Street in Lyons, about 6 businesses, an entire city block. Fire started at one building and just quickly moved. So one of the things that drones provide, especially the thermal drone, even during daytime, can provide some very interesting current event and post-event reconnaissance inside the building. So I'm going to go ahead and I just want to mention that those of you not familiar with the DJI Mavic, the advanced, it has, as I mentioned earlier, a 4K color camera and a 640 by 512 thermal camera. The thermal camera and the color camera, regardless of which one you're showing on your video screen, they are recording simultaneously. And so in this mission, I pulled out the video and then stitched them together. So I'll go ahead and start each of these and they'll play simultaneously. And what you're seeing here is I take off after I've been cleared to, the chief is standing behind me watching my monitor. And you see the difference. The color camera on the left has a hard time, even with an adjustment on the lens, the f-stop, it's still dark inside to the color camera. Thermal camera provides a very unique and incredibly detailed and brilliant image. And of course, the building is still hot. There's still smoke going on inside. They asked me to penetrate, go inside with the drone and look for hot spots or areas that are still smoldering. And this is about a 1-minute video clip. So we entered the building and then did a pan across. And as you can see, the delta, the difference between the right and the left is really dramatic. This is set up white is hot for obvious reasons. So anything that is bright on the right image is either residual heat from the fire or hot spots. Now this building has a basement, which you'll see we flew just to the entry of it. And this was done pretty well here. The fire was mitigated really well. There were some small areas of smoke. You look in the color down here at the bottom, we have smoke still rising, and that's illustrated by the bright. And the thing about the drone thermal camera is you can put your cursor over an area and it'll give you the temperature, either in Celsius or Fahrenheit, depending on which setting you have. And it can give you a sense of what is still a potential flare-up inside the building. And again, we got more smoke rising here, but that's directly over a very hot spot here, which was about 400 degrees when measured. Now down here on the right, you see this is a stream of water on a busted pipe, and the basement's starting to fill. Very hard to see here. You can see the rippling water, but it's hard to see the stream and where the source is. So this was helpful to them as well. We had some really hot spots, residual, and especially under this flooring here, these temperatures popped up to indicate that they needed to put some more water suppression under the base, in the basement, below the main floor. But this was a totally destroyed building. It's all since been torn down, and I guess they're gonna rebuild. And then this is just about done. Again, the chief's looking over my shoulder. He's on the radio telling his squad to get ready to go back in and place some more water on the areas that I pointed out with the drone. So right about here, I start to come back up, back out the door and land. We'll let this finish. Again, for those of you that have used DJI, and in particular the Mavic, there are 3 settings. You have tripod mode for cinematic, very smooth control. That's what I'm using here. So there's no jumping, jittery movement of the drone or the image. And then there's the standard setting, and then there's sport. I'll talk about sport towards the end on how to recover in high winds, which can happen. So, and we're backing out now. We'll land outside, and that'll be the end of this particular slide. And we get about 20, 25 minutes of flight time at this altitude. Lions is pretty high, so we normally get 25 minutes out of a 30-minute maximum at sea level. So now let's go to mapping. This I mentioned earlier, a 2-person team, 1 drone can go and map an entire town within a day. And so this is a service opportunity for those of you that have independent businesses and you'd like to contract your services out. This is one of the key elements that you can deliver to a client. You could map, and you could do 2D or 3D mapping depending on the software that you choose. Ryan and his team will speak to this at the end of this presentation. So that just shows, these are automatic, by the way. You can pull up a grid, stretch and put it and place it. It'll automatically overlay so that you don't have any gaps in your imaging. And then you simply process it to get your 2D or three-dimensional imagery.
And now, Alan, I'll ask you while you're here,
Yeah.
do you think this requires a, multi-$1,000 system to be able to get you a good data set, or is it something that you can kind of get started with a smaller one? I'm sure people are wondering about the advancement of the system itself.
Absolutely, the latter is the case, not the former. You do not need a $50, $30, $40,000 aircraft to do this. Now, of course, the more sophisticated your aircraft, meaning that like a 210 or an M30, you have the ability to carry much larger cameras. But the Mavic itself provides a tremendous platform. With a color camera, you can go through and get a absolutely phenomenal 3D image after processing, after all the images are stitched together. It's small, it's portable. You don't have to have a large van to carry all of its accessories. A small SUV and you're good to go. And speed is the same. You're going to go through the picture taking process at about 3 to 4 miles an hour, maybe 5, depending on how you have the altitude you're set up at in your field of view. So you can start off with a $3,000 investment with a Zoom Mavic, or Mavic, that's a Mavic 2, or you could go to Mavic 3. Prices are coming down, but the functionality is increasing on every iteration that DJI and others come out. I mentioned DJI only because that's kind of how I grew up with the drone industry. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yep, that's good. Yeah, I just wanted to point that out, that it doesn't require a super advanced system these days to be able to capture that data. So
right, and in the distance, you can do 2, 3, 4 mile line of sight, so you can do rather large areas. The only limitation is battery, and typically most drones today, multi-rotors in particular, are limited to less than 1 hour of flight time.
Yeah.
On this image here, in this video I'm going to show you, I'm with the Boulder County Sheriff's Office SWAT team as a mission support specialist. I run robots and drones. This is the church in Lafayette, Flatirons Community Church. It's a very large church that my family and I go to. It is now used almost exclusively for the unfortunate funerals we have with law enforcement and public safety individuals. This was a funeral. At all funerals, we have overwatch and protection. This is a Sierra team, sniper team, on top of Flatirons. These guys are up there from the very beginning, early in the morning, roughly 6 o'clock in the morning, set up and keeping watch through the entire funeral program, and usually get done about 2 in the afternoon. So these guys are up there, and they might have had some water or coffee, but they made a request if somebody could crawl up and give them some water and sandwiches. So I'm flying this drone that's taken the image. And then my partner from BES, he's flying a 210 coming in up here at the top. We created a release mechanism, payload mechanism with servos, so we can do exactly this. The 210 has a good payload capacity. It's a quad rotor, but very powerful. And you'll see we'll bring this down. Everybody's looking up, kind of like dogs looking for a bone. And so we brought it in, and everybody was told over their packs at their radios, don't stand directly under it. We don't want to bang you on the head with the payload. This payload had a couple of bottles of water and a couple of sandwiches. So we dropped it down to them. Once they realized what was in it, they acknowledged our delivery with a nice gesture right here, waving at the drone, thumbs up. Everybody was happy, and we did a public service there to our Sierra team with the Boulder County Sheriff's Office SWAT team. And so you can take this example And while a Mavic doesn't lend itself well to carrying payload because of its size, but if you do a 210 or the next generation drones, multi-copters, you can carry first aid kit, a cell phone, a radio, tourniquet, snake bite injection system. If somebody gets bit by a rattlesnake in the mountains and then you can't get to them in time, but with an ambulance, a drone offers a tremendous opportunity. So ISR. So this is the flood of 2013. This is the St. Vrain River in Longmont. There was a TFR, temporary flight restriction by the FAA. It was to the west of us. So this bridge was a demarcation point. This was a FEMA-led event as the flood really started to progress. So we were given permission to fly. There was some reports of a possible body that was floating down the river. And so we deployed here. I deployed as a SO Sheriff's Office person with the drone pilot, who was at the time early adopter. Again, this is 2013, 10 years ago. So this was a fixed wing. So we're getting to do the launch, getting ready. So fully automated. And again, 10 years ago. And then this is not a VTOL aircraft, so a unique recovery, which works very, very well. Slows it down and no damage to this. It's designed to do this. So easy recovery, especially if there's some wind in the area as well. And now we see multi-rotor drones with the same kind of emergency recovery. You can buy deployable parachutes for recovery should you have a failure in the flight mode. Operational safety. Again, I mentioned that a lot of communities are now employing lightning detection. Get with your local fire departments, emergency management organizations, and if they have this, make it clear to them that you have an ability to deploy. All you need is a GPS location, and you can go out almost immediately after the lightning strike and determine whether or not a fire has started. And that allows wildland fire teams, hand teams, to get in there and put it out before it becomes a conflagration. So here we are to Q&A.
Awesome. Yeah, that was great.
Push this back to Ryan. Go ahead, Ryan.
That was fantastic. Some things I wanted to touch on. I didn't want to interrupt you while you were in your flow there, but one thing you pointed out was the time to capture some of this data. So it's not going to be an extensive period of time that they would have to put aside to be able to map out cities or high probable fire areas to be able to make action and mitigate before there is a risk. Would you say that's accurate?
Yes, and along those lines, things that we've learned over the years, cinematically, if you will. Typically, when you're doing a grid map, you're running between anywhere from 1 to 5 miles an hour. So you just kind of have to bake that into the time frame. And the software now, especially on DJI and I assume in other products, it automatically determines how much time it takes to do the grid. And so the software is so sophisticated now, it will automatically stop in mid-grid if you're running low on battery, whatever your settings are, 20%, 15%, whatever. It allows the aircraft to automatically return home. You change the battery and you re-continue, and it goes right back where it left off and starts taking pictures. Thing to remember that we've learned over time, the most ideal time to take mapping images, especially in open areas like this we're talking about, is to do it between about 11 o'clock in the morning and 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The reason is the sun is directly overhead and you minimize the shadows. Shadows can often be an impediment to clarity. And so the ideal time is to fly with the sun above you, and it gives you a really good clear perspective around 3D objects, whether that's trees, buildings, etc. So,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, and you know, with a consumer model drone, I would say that's pretty accurate in terms of the speed. Nowadays, with some of the enterprise models, especially with the new DJI M3E, with the mechanical shutter, you're able to fly upwards of 20, 25 miles an hour and not have any warping or you know, clarity issues with that 2D, 3D model. So you're able to really get around 100 acres an hour with that M3E and some of the M300 P1 setups and whatnot. So I think that just kind of goes to show that it's not a huge commitment to be able to go out and actually capture that and plan for some mitigation in high probable areas. So absolutely. And then how often do you think they would need to go out and capture some of these data sets, 2D, 3D models, to be able to see how much growth there's been in the what you refer to as the fuse and whatnot? Is it a yearly, every 2 years, a couple times a year? What would you think?
Absolutely twice a year. I think I may have mentioned at the outset, there are 2 times of the year that you need to go out and do these surveys, video surveys. And that's in the spring because we're coming out of winter, the dead period. So grasses were left over from the fall and now have dried out. In Colorado, we have low humidity. And coming out of winter time, we can dry to single digit humidity and in the grasses and brush within a few days. You know, 4 or 5 days of 70-degree weather in the spring with 7, 8, 10% humidity, that grass becomes fuel very, very quickly. So you want to do your scans in the spring, get that data set done, and then you want to do it again in the fall. Because during the summertime, you've got grasses growing, you've got weeds growing, things are typically green. Also, those fuses you mentioned, those ditches are filled with water for irrigation on the agricultural side. So those don't become such a risk as they do when they're empty or dry and the fuel has not been mitigated. So 2 times, springtime and then the fall. And as you know, most people here probably recognize that Colorado, about a couple of years ago, we used to have a fire season, not anymore. The season is 365. We can
Yeah,
have a fire
unfortunately.
in the middle of winter because of the various types of rainfall or snowfall that we have. There's a red flag right now in southeastern Colorado for today, and I think yesterday as well. High winds, low humidity, no moisture. So
Yep.
twice a year you want to do this.
And then I think another thing to point out is you did show the grid flight plan that you set up when you do these mapping missions. And so really the technology is working for you where you're not having to do a ton of training and educating on how to properly capture these data sets. You're able to just kind of select an area and tell it to go. Now, one question we got was, what's the best altitude you think to fly these missions at?
Great question. So the reason why I like the Mavic, it's not intrusive. You know, at 50 feet, you can hear it, but it's not like, you know, a 210 at 50 feet, which is a much more powerful aircraft. So if you're doing a mapping of open, well, whether it's open or it's buildings, you're trying to get a nice 3D image of a location, several hundred acres, whatever, you're going to be flying somewhere between 30 and 75 feet. You can certainly go higher, but if you want more detail, creating those 3D images where you can literally fly through on the computer screen, that is going to be your margin, anywhere from, again, 30 feet, upwards of 75, maybe 100 feet. And again, you're absolutely right on the speed. Bigger the aircraft, and with shutter technology, you can go much faster. But if you're starting out with your business and all you can afford is a $3,000 Zoom Mavic or similar with other products, then you're going to have to fly a little bit slower because of the technology that you're putting in the air. But the beauty is you can start off small and then work your way up as your business grows.
Yeah, and I think another thing to point out here is in the survey mapping industry, you talk about GSD, your ground sampling distance, quite a bit, and so it's really going to depend on your focal length of the camera. It's going to depend on the GSD that you want for that project, I think. So the lower you fly, the more photos you're going to need to take, which is going to reduce your ground sampling distance, effectively giving you better overall resolution. So with a smaller sensor and you want a higher resolution, yep, I think you're going to have to fly lower and fly slower with more photos. But when you do have a more advanced or bigger camera, you would be able to raise that altitude up quite a bit, as well as your speed, and it would be less photos altogether. So I think that the one thing I just wanted to point out was that it kind of depends system to system on altitude, speed, and data capture time, I guess you could say.
Yep, absolutely.
So, yep. And then you kind of pointed out a couple different types of drones for fire mitigation, such as thermal drones, ones to do mapping. And I think that some people that are either starting or early on in their drone program wouldn't be able to afford, all these different types of drones for different uses. And I wanted to kind of talk about, can you use the same drone for multiple uses, or do you kind of want your drones to be specific to each kind of field that you're in?
Another good question. So I have a set of drones. I got an S1000 from way back with DJI, and I have the Mavic Enterprise Zoom, and I have the Advanced. The Zoom and the Advanced, very different. The Zoom is an optical zoom. It has much more zoom capability or capability. The Advanced is a digital zoom. It goes in steps. So if you're doing pictures, you get about 8 times zoom on the color and 3 times zoom on the digital, on the thermal rather. And so you kind of have to pick your technology based on the time of day and what the mission is. So if it's a daytime search and rescue, I typically use my zoom camera. If I'm doing mapping, I use my zoom camera. And if it's anything to do at night, automatically to the thermal for sure.
Yep. And then I will point out with the new Mavic 3 thermal, and here I will actually put one more thing on screen here. Let's see. I can kind of give you some ideas of the current models that DJI has and that we offer. Is that showing? Let's see here. Great. Okay, cool. Hope you can see the different specs here on the Mavics, or the M300, M30, and the Mavic 3 E and T. So some things to point out with those is the increased flight time, the ability to do the different payloads on there. So like with the M300, you're able to do the P1 camera, which is meant for photogrammetry as well, equipped it with a thermal camera to kind of make it a multi-use platform. With something like the M3E or T, now the E is not going to have the thermal on it, but it would have the same, or not the same. It does have a wide camera and a zoom camera in the ability to do the mission flights. So within the DJI Pilot 2 app, you're able to set an area to map. Now, it's not going to be ideal to use a smaller sensor like what's on the M3T for mapping, but in this case, you would be able to kind of have one system be able to dabble in each kind of category there for mapping as well as the thermal. So that's kind of one thing to point out there.
If you could leave that up for a second, I want to point out a safety issue that a lot of people don't recognize, especially when they're in the panic mode of possibly losing their aircraft. So most people know what your maximum flight speed is of the aircraft you're flying, or at least you should know. And typically with the Mavics, you're looking at about 30-mile-an-hour wind speed capability. Anything above that, and the wind's going away from you, you're going to start seeing your aircraft head to Kansas. So what I find, a lot of the junior pilots that don't have a lot of experience don't realize that they have a sport mode that will give them the ability to offset that extra wind that came up. And you can see that in the M30 and the comparison to the M3. That previous slide that you had showed the
there we go.
there you go. Wind resistance normal is 34 miles per hour on the M30, max speed at 51. And on the right, you see that 47 mile per hour with the Mavic under sport mode versus the normal mode of 27. So if you're flying a 27-mile-an-hour wind maximum, and all of a sudden here in Colorado, in a few seconds, you get a sustained gust of wind coming through that's blowing you away, go to sport mode right away, and then get back on the ground. So you save your aircraft. Just wanted to point that out, that a lot of people don't realize that that's a magic recovery switch on your controller. So that's
Absolutely.
all.
Yep, no, absolutely. Yeah, and I will say that DJI is going to be a little conservative with all their specs here on the wind resistance, max speed. We actually flew the M30 in 40+ mile per hour winds up in Loveland a couple weeks ago. Now, the one thing they will not be conservative on is the flight time. So that's going to be the absolute max that it will fly. So some of these numbers you will want to be a little cautious, because here, especially mile high, we're not going to get the full max flight time on some of these. But it just kind of goes to show the current lineup. And now this slide was from a previous webinar that we did, comparing the M300 to the M30 to the M3E, which you can find on our YouTube page. But let's see if we have any more questions in our chat box here. I think we've answered everyone's questions. Now, I will just kind of point out the different price points of these systems. For the M300, you're starting around $13,199. That's going to be for the aircraft itself. And that's actually going to be the one you see here behind us. But that one can be equipped with different style payloads, like a LiDAR sensor, photogrammetry sensor, thermal sensors. So that can be kind of highly customizable. For the M30 and M30T, the thermal version starts at $13,999, and that's going to have the payload integrated into it. So this would be good for search and rescue, for live fire situations. And then this aircraft can also be put through the same mission planning and mapping data capture that we kind of talked about throughout this webinar. And then with the M3T, that's starting at $5,500. So if you did have any other questions about the systems itself, please reach out to Shaquille and myself. And then one more thing I'm going to show you here.
While you're doing that, if I could interject just a data point. A lot of folks, are kind of hesitant because of the investment in a drone, municipalities in particular. Here's the interesting thing. The thermal Mavic with batteries is basically $7,000 plus or minus. The cost of a pack set, a radio handset carried by law enforcement, fire, etc. Boulder County Sheriff uses Motorola. Each one of those radios is $7,000. So the cost of one radio, you can put in your agency a drone, a thermal drone. So I just wanted to throw that out.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It's just become easier and easier to access the technology. So, and then let's see, we do have our future webinar coming up here in a couple weeks. We're going to be going over the Mavic 3 Enterprise and the new point of interest mode that was recently put on the latest firmware update. So we will be sending out the recording to this webinar as well as a sign up link for our future webinar, probably first thing next week. And if you guys did have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to myself or Shaquille, and we will get them answered for you. But thank you so much, Alan, for joining us today, and thank you all for attending, and we will talk to you guys soon.
Again, thank you very much, and good luck and have a great weekend.
You as well.
Thank you.
No fires.
Yeah.